The church was full that morning. Every pew was occupied. Families sat shoulder to shoulder. Children whispered. The choir's last note still lingered in the air. Evelyn Carter stood in line for communion, her hands folded, her eyes lowered. She had waited all week for this moment. For 72 years, Evelyn had come to this church. Through rain and snow, through sickness and grief, through joy and loss. She had scrubbed its floors when no one was watching. She had arranged flowers with trembling hands. She had served coffee after Mass with a quiet smile. But that morning, before she could take even one more step, a hand rose in front of her. Firm, sudden. "No," the priest said. "Ma'am, please step back." The words cut through the sanctuary like a blade. Evelyn froze. The priest leaned closer, his voice low, but not low enough. "You're not properly prepared to receive communion today. Please return when you can present yourself with dignity." People stared. No one spoke. And in that unbearable silence, Evelyn Carter felt something break inside her that had taken a lifetime to build. If you believe that faith is more than appearances, if you believe that God walks with the forgotten, stay with this story. And if stories like this speak to your heart, subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. Evelyn slowly lowered her hands. They trembled as if they no longer belonged to her. For a moment, she thought the priest might reconsider, that he might see her face, the lines carved by decades of labor, the quiet devotion in her eyes, that he might remember the woman who had shown up early every Saturday to clean the sacristy when no one else would. But Father Matthew had already turned away. "Next person," he said. Evelyn stepped backward, one small step at a time, her worn shoes scraping softly against the stone floor. Each movement felt heavy, as though gravity itself had doubled. She could feel the eyes on her back, some curious, some uncomfortable, some quickly looking away. No one defended her. No one asked if she was okay. Not a single voice broke the silence. Evelyn reached the end of the aisle and turned toward the side door. Her head bowed so low her white hair fell across her face. She did not cry. Not yet. Shock held her together, fragile and numb. Outside, the morning air was cold. The church's stone steps were damp with dew. Evelyn sat down slowly, easing herself onto the edge of the steps as her knees protested. Her joints were swollen that day. Arthritis had a way of reminding her how old she was. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. For over 30 years, this church had been her anchor. When her husband died, it was here she came to sit in silence. When money was tight, and it almost always was, it was here she lit candles and prayed for strength. When she felt invisible to the world, she believed God still saw her. Until today, a memory surfaced uninvited. Evelyn, years earlier, kneeling alone after Mass, wiping down the altar rail with a rag she brought from home. No one had asked her to do it. She simply noticed it was dirty, and she could not bear to leave it that way. "God deserves better," she had whispered back then. Now she wondered if God felt the same about her. Her chest tightened. Her throat burned. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know to whom. "I'm sorry I didn't try harder." The words came out broken. "I'm sorry for the way I look. I'm sorry I don't smell right. I'm sorry for being poor." A tear slipped down her cheek and fell onto the stone beneath her. Evelyn did not see Helen yet. She did not hear the church doors open behind her. All she felt was the weight of a single thought pressing down on her heart, louder than any accusation spoken aloud. Maybe she really wasn't worthy. Evelyn sat there for a long moment, staring at the gray stone beneath her feet. The church doors closed behind her with a dull, hollow sound. Mass continued inside. She could hear the priest's voice rising and falling through the thick walls, calm and steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. As if a woman hadn't just been turned away at the altar moments earlier. She wondered how long it would take before people forgot her. Probably not long. A breeze moved through the courtyard, carrying the faint smell of incense mixed with damp leaves. Evelyn pulled her thin sweater tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she felt, not just in her body, but deep inside her chest. She thought of all the Sundays she had sat in those wooden pews, The Sundays when her husband was still alive, squeezing her hand during the homily. The Sundays when she came alone afterward, her grief so heavy she could barely breathe. The Sundays when she arrived early to wipe down the tables, refill the hymnals, and straighten what others left behind. No one had noticed then either, but she had believed it mattered anyway. Now, doubt crept in like a slow poison. Maybe the priest was right. Maybe dignity really did depend on how one looked, how one smelled, how neatly one fit into the rows of polished shoes and pressed coats. Evelyn glanced down at her hands. They were rough and swollen, the skin cracked from years of scrubbing floors, washing clothes, cleaning houses that were never hers. These hands had worked her entire life. They had cared for a dying man. They had folded in prayer more times than she could count. And yet, moments ago, they had been deemed unworthy. A soft sound escaped her throat, something between a sigh and a sob. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed, even though no one was watching. That embarrassment surprised her. After everything that had happened, she still felt the need to hide her pain. She pushed herself up from the steps with effort, her knees aching in protest. "I can't stay here," she whispered. The church that had once felt like shelter now felt like a place she did not belong. The idea of sitting through the rest of the Mass, of passing familiar faces who had seen her, turned away and said nothing, was unbearable. Evelyn took one last look at the tall wooden doors. She expected to feel anger, but what settled in her chest instead was something quieter and far more dangerous: shame. As she turned and began the slow walk back toward the road, a single thought followed her, steady and cruel, matching the rhythm of her steps. If God's house had no room for her, maybe God himself did not either. She did not notice the footsteps behind her yet. She did not see the doors open again. And she certainly did not know that someone was about to speak words that would challenge everything she had just come to believe. Not yet. "Evelyn." The voice came from behind her, breathless, urgent. Evelyn stopped walking but didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. Helen Brooks hurried across the courtyard, her sensible shoes clicking against the pavement. She reached Evelyn and gently took her arm, as if afraid Evelyn might disappear if she let go. "Oh, honey," Helen said softly. "I saw everything." Evelyn finally looked up. Her eyes were red now, the shock beginning to give way to something rawer, more exposed. "I shouldn't have come," Evelyn murmured. "I should have known better." Helen shook her head immediately. "No, don't you say that. Don't you dare say that." She guided Evelyn toward a low stone wall and helped her sit. Helen stayed standing at first, pacing once like she was trying to keep her anger contained. "That was wrong," Helen said. "What he did was wrong. God is not like that." Evelyn gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe he is," she said quietly. "Maybe I've been fooling myself all these years." Helen crouched down so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm now. "I've seen you come here early when no one else bothered. I've seen you clean bathrooms no one wanted to touch. I've seen you give the last dollar in your purse to that donation basket." She took Evelyn's hands, holding them tightly. "If anyone belongs in that church, it's you." Evelyn looked away. Belonging doesn't seem to count for much anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the town drifted in from the street, cars passing, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Life, going on as usual. "I don't think I can come back," Evelyn said at last. "Not after today." Helen's grip softened, but she didn't let go. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said gently. "Just don't let one man make you believe God turned his back on you." Evelyn nodded, though uncertainty still clouded her face. She stood slowly, wincing as her knees protested. Helen offered her arm again, and this time Evelyn accepted it without hesitation. They walked toward the sidewalk together. As they reached the corner, Evelyn paused and glanced back once more at the church. The building stood tall and unmoved, just as it always had. "I used to think this place was my refuge," she said softly. Helen squeezed her arm. "Refuge isn't a building," she replied. "It's the love that meets you when you're at your lowest." Evelyn didn't answer, because deep down, despite Helen's words, a question still echoed inside her. quiet, persistent, and heavy. If God truly saw her, why did she feel so invisible? And for the first time in many years, Evelyn Carter walked away from church not with peace in her heart, but with doubt following closely behind. Evelyn's trailer sat at the far edge of the park, where the gravel road thinned into mud and weeds pushed through rusted chain-link fences. The aluminum siding was dull and dented, its paint long faded by sun and winters that had shown little mercy. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of damp metal and old carpet greeted her. The heater hummed weakly, struggling against the cold that crept in through every seam. Evelyn set her purse down and leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the quiet settle around her. No choir, no prayers, just the low ticking of a wall clock and the ache in her knees. She moved slowly through the narrow space, past the small table with one chair, past the sink with a slow drip she could never quite fix. On the fridge, a yellow sticker warned that her electric bill was overdue. 2 more weeks, maybe less, before they shut it off. Then she saw the envelope. It lay on the table, stiff and white, stamped with bold red letters that made her stomach tighten before she even picked it up. Final notice. Evelyn sat down heavily and opened it with trembling fingers. The words blurred at first. She blinked, forced herself to read again. Outstanding balance. $4,806 action required. Within 30 days, failure to comply will result in eviction 30 days. Her breath caught. The letter went on about late fees and policy and consequences, but Evelyn stopped reading. The numbers were all that mattered. They sat on the page like a sentence already decided. She reached for a pencil and a scrap of paper, doing the math she already knew by heart. $20 here, $30 there, $50 on a good day if someone needed extra cleaning. Even if she worked every single day, no breaks, no meals she could afford, she would still fall short. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, as if treating it gently might soften what it meant, and slipped it back into the envelope. Her eyes drifted to the small shelf above the table. There, tucked between an old photo and a cracked mug, was a simple wooden cross. Her husband had carved it years ago, back when his hands were steady and his lungs still strong. She picked it up and held it in her palm. Lord, she whispered, her voice barely audible, I don't need much. Her throat tightened. I just need to stay. The silence offered no answer. Evelyn set the cross down and stared at the wall, where a faint water stain spread like a shadowed wing. Her mother used to say the stains like that were angels watching over the house. Evelyn didn't know if she believed that anymore. All she knew was this. In 30 days, she might have nowhere left to believe from. The wooden cross in Evelyn's hand felt heavier than it should have. She lowered herself onto the edge of the narrow bed, the mattress sagging under her weight, and let the memories come. They always did when the trailer grew this quiet. There had been a time when life felt possible. Evelyn and her husband, Thomas, had moved into this trailer nearly 30 years earlier, back when it still smelled new and the paint still shone in the sunlight. Thomas worked long shifts at the coal processing plant outside town. It was hard, dangerous work, but it paid just enough for them to dream. They talked about traveling someday, about maybe buying a small house on a real street with a porch and a mailbox that wasn't bent. They never made it that far. It started with a cough. At first, Thomas brushed it off. Dust, he said. Everyone at the plant coughed, but the cough stayed. Then came the wheezing, the shortness of breath, the nights when he sat upright in bed just to breathe. Doctors' visits followed. Tests, prescriptions, words Evelyn didn't understand but learned to fear. Occupational lung disease. Treatment was expensive. Insurance covered some of it, but never enough. Each bill arrived thicker than the last. Evelyn remembered the night Thomas sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, the stack of envelopes spread out before him. I'll take care of it, he had said quietly. I'll figure something out. She didn't know then what that meant. Thomas took out a loan, then another. Small at first, then larger. He told himself he would pay it back once he was strong enough to return to work. But strength never came back the way he hoped. For a while, the medicine helped. Thomas laughed again. He even planted tomatoes in pots outside the trailer, insisting fresh air was good for him. Evelyn believed it was over. She believed God had answered her prayers. Then winter came. Thomas collapsed one icy morning, right there in the kitchen, his breath shallow, his face gray. He died 2 days later in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Evelyn held his hand until it grew cold. After the funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards were packed away, Evelyn discovered the truth. The loans, the interest, the balance that kept growing, month after month. Thomas had been trying to protect her. He had carried the burden alone, believing love meant silence. Now, years later, that love had turned into a number printed in red ink. 4,260. Evelyn pressed the heel of her hand against her chest as the old ache returned. "I don't blame you," she whispered, staring at the empty space beside her on the bed. "You did what you thought was right." But the forgiveness didn't erase the fear. Love had built her life. And now, love was the reason she was about to lose it. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the thin walls of the trailer. Somewhere deep inside, a question formed, one she had never dared to ask before. If God saw all of this, why had he let her carry it alone? The answer, like the room around her, remained painfully silent. The next morning, Evelyn wrapped herself in her coat and walked to the coin laundry 3 blocks away. The place was already humming, metal drums spinning, quarters clinking, steam rising from warm clothes. It smelled like detergent and damp cotton, a smell Evelyn had known most of her life. She nodded to a few familiar faces and took her usual seat on the cracked plastic chair near the window. Ruth spotted her right away. "There you are," Ruth said, wiping her hands on her jeans as she crossed the room. "I was wondering where you went yesterday." Evelyn forced a smile. "Had things to take care of." Ruth hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Listen, I might have something for you. A good thing." Evelyn's heart lifted despite herself. "Couple downtown rentals, Airbnb places," Ruth continued. "Big turnover. Curtains, sheets, the works. The owner's paying $150 a day if you can handle it." $150. The number echoed in Evelyn's mind like a bell. That kind of money could mean groceries without counting pennies. It could mean a bill paid. Maybe 2. "I can do it," Evelyn said quickly. "I've done heavier." "I know you have," Ruth said. "But there's one thing." She pulled out her phone, scrolling. The owner sent a message. Ruth read it silently first. Her mouth tightened. Evelyn felt the shift before the words came. "Looking for someone clean and presentable," Ruth read aloud, uncomfortable. "Professional appearance. No odors." The air seemed to thin. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if she had expected this all along. "Of course," she said. "That makes sense." Ruth winced. "They don't mean anything by it. You know how people are." "Yes," Evelyn thought. "I know exactly how they are." "I'll be there," Evelyn said. "Just tell me where." Ruth gave her the address and a time. "You sure? It's a lot of stairs." "I'm sure." Evelyn stood and gathered her things, her hands steady even as something inside her tightened. As she walked home, she rehearsed what she would do. Wash her only decent sweater again, scrub her shoes, rinse her hair longer than usual even if the water ran cold. She would make herself acceptable. That evening, she washed her clothes in the sink, wringing them out until her fingers ached. She hung them near the heater and whispered a small prayer that they would dry by morning. Not for comfort, not for mercy, just for one chance. As she lay down that night, the words from the altar returned uninvited. "Present yourself with dignity." Evelyn stared into the darkness and wondered how much dignity a person was allowed to have when survival depended on someone else's approval. Evelyn arrived early. The house stood at the end of a narrow street lined with freshly trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes. White siding, wide windows. A small sign by the door read, "Welcome," written in a looping, cheerful font. She paused at the bottom of the steps, straightening her sweater one last time. It was still faintly damp at the cuffs, cool against her skin, but it was clean. Her shoes were scrubbed. Her hair was neatly pulled back. She had done everything she could. Evelyn climbed the steps carefully and knocked. She waited. 5 seconds. 10. Just as she lifted her hand to knock again, the door opened. A woman in her early 30s stood there, dressed in athletic wear that looked untouched by sweat. Her hair was perfectly smooth, her phone already in her hand. "Yes?" the woman said, her eyes flicking briefly to Evelyn's face, then lower, to her shoes, her sleeves, the worn strap of her bag. "Good morning," Evelyn said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'm here about the laundry job. Ruth from the Coin Laundry said you were expecting me." The woman frowned slightly. "That's already taken." "Oh," Evelyn said. "I was told to come this morning. I can start right away." The woman shook her head. "Plans changed." She began to close the door. Evelyn's hand moved without thinking, pressing gently against the frame. "Please," she said. "I really need the work. I can do anything. Laundry, cleaning, whatever you need." The woman's expression shifted, uncomfortable now, edged with irritation. "I have someone," she repeated. "A regular, professional." Evelyn nodded. "Of course." The word professional hung between them like a verdict. "I'm sorry," the woman said, already pulling the door closed. "Good luck." The latch clicked. Evelyn stood there for a moment, staring at her reflection in the glass panel. The image looked small, out of place. Slowly, she stepped back down onto the sidewalk. The street was quiet. Somewhere, a sprinkler clicked on, misting a perfectly green lawn. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag and turned away, her steps slower now. The door behind her remained closed, and with it, the one opportunity she had allowed herself to hope for slipped quietly out of reach. Evelyn walked without direction. She passed the corner cafe where the windows were fogged from warm air and laughter. Inside, people leaned close to one another, mugs cradled in their hands, talking about weekend plans and small complaints that didn't threaten survival. She kept her eyes down. A block later, she crossed the street as a pickup rolled past, music spilling from its open windows. A young couple pushed a stroller on the opposite sidewalk. The baby kicked happily, unaware of anything beyond the sun on its face. Life was moving forward. Just not with her. Evelyn's stomach twisted painfully. She hadn't eaten since the night before. Just a slice of bread she'd saved, dry and thin. She told herself hunger was nothing new, but today it felt sharper, as if it were reminding her of every door that had closed. She reached the main square and sat down on a low concrete wall near the overlook. From here, she could see most of the town, the rooftops, the church steeple rising above them, the thin line of road that led out toward the hills. It was beautiful. That almost made it worse. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap and stared out at the view. She felt like a smudge on a painting, something that didn't belong in the scene but couldn't erase itself either. She wondered how many people had walked past her that morning without seeing her at all. Not cruelly, not intentionally, just indifferently. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, breathing slowly until it passed. Her heart beat too fast, then too slow, as if it couldn't decide whether to keep going. "I can't do this," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her. She thought of the trailer, of the letter waiting on the table, of the church doors closing behind her. For the first time, a frightening thought took shape. What if this was it? What if she really was alone now? Not just poor, not just struggling, but truly unseen by everyone, even God. Evelyn closed her eyes. She did not notice the footsteps approaching. She did not hear someone stop beside her. And she had no idea that, in the next few moments, everything she believed about being forgotten was about to be quietly undone. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The voice was calm, not loud, not urgent, just there. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly. A man stood a few feet away, then lowered himself onto the step beside her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He didn't rush. He didn't hover. He didn't look alarmed or curious. He simply sat. He looked to be in his early 40s, maybe a little older. His jeans were worn at the knees. His boots were scuffed, the kind that had seen real work. He wore a plain white shirt, clean but faded from many washings. His face was weathered, as if he spent a lot of time outdoors. But it was his eyes that made Evelyn pause. They were dark and steady, not sharp, not judging, attentive. "I'm fine," Evelyn said automatically. "Just need a minute." The man nodded. "These steps can do that to you," he said lightly. "I slipped here once, twisted my ankle pretty bad. My mother scolded me for weeks." Evelyn let out a small, surprised breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Your mother's still around?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Not anymore, but she still watches over me. I'm sure of it." "That's nice," Evelyn murmured. They sat in silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that didn't demand anything. "Do you have family?" he asked gently. Evelyn shook her head. "Not anymore. My husband passed a long time ago. We didn't have children. I'm sorry." "It's all right," she said, though her voice wavered. "You get used to being alone." The man turned slightly toward her, not close enough to invade her space, but enough that she felt seen. "No one is meant to carry everything alone," he said. Evelyn didn't know why those words struck her the way they did. Her throat tightened before she could stop it. She looked down, embarrassed, and that was when she noticed his hand move to his pocket. He pulled out a folded bill and placed it gently in her palm. $20. "Please," he said before she could protest. "You haven't eaten today." "I can't take this," Evelyn said, trying to hand it back. "Yes, you can." His voice was still kind, but firmer now. "And you should. Tomorrow still matters." She hesitated, then closed her fingers around the bill. "Thank you," she whispered. "Really?" He stood then, brushing dust from his jeans. "Take care of yourself, Yoram," he said. "And remember, good things often arrive when we least expect them." Before Evelyn could ask his name, before she could even gather the right words, he turned and walked down the steps, blending into the movement of the street below. Evelyn rose unsteadily and looked around. He was gone, as if he had never been there at all. She stared at the $20 bill in her hand. It wasn't much, not in the way people usually measured help, but it was enough for food, enough for one more day. And more than that, it was proof of something she had almost stopped believing. Someone had seen her. As Evelyn began to walk again, her steps felt steadier than before. In her chest, beneath the fear and exhaustion, something unfamiliar stirred. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was a small, quiet light, flickering, fragile, and stubbornly alive. Evelyn walked toward the small grocery at the edge of Main Street, the $20 bill folded carefully in her coat pocket, as if it might disappear if she didn't keep track of it. The bell above the door chimed when she stepped inside. Warm air and the smell of bread wrapped around her immediately. The shelves weren't full, but they were familiar. Cans stacked neatly, produce arranged with quiet care. Tanya stood behind the counter, tying up a box of deliveries. "Well, look who it is," Tanya said with a smile. "You all right, Evelyn?" Evelyn nodded. "I'm getting there." She picked up a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, hesitating as she counted the coins in her hand. When she reached the counter, Tanya glanced down, then back up at Evelyn's face. "You need anything else?" Evelyn shook her head. "This is fine." Tanya rang it up, then reached under the counter and added a small bag without saying anything. When she finished, she pushed everything toward Evelyn. "That'll do," she said. Evelyn frowned. "I don't think that's the right total." Tanya waved it off. "You can pay me later. Or don't." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Just come back." Evelyn felt her eyes sting. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "For what?" Tanya shrugged. "This town takes care of its own, or at least it's supposed to." Evelyn stepped back out into the street, the grocery bag warm against her arm. Inside were eggs, bread, milk, and a small block of cheese she hadn't chosen. She hadn't had cheese in weeks. As she walked home, the weight of the bag felt different from the weight of her worries. Lighter somehow. Manageable. But when she turned onto the gravel road leading to her trailer, her steps slowed. Something white was taped to her door. Her chest tightened before she could read it. Final notice. The words were bold. Unforgiving. 30 days remaining. Evelyn's hand trembled as she peeled the paper free. The grocery bag slipped from her fingers, spilling bread and eggs onto the dirt. She didn't bother to pick them up. 30 days. The kindness she'd just received hadn't disappeared, but it suddenly felt small against the weight of what was coming. She pressed her forehead against the door, closing her eyes. Lord, she whispered, her breath fogging the cold metal. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Inside, the trailer was quiet. The letter waited on the table like a shadow that wouldn't move. Evelyn stepped inside slowly, carrying both the warmth of unexpected kindness and the heavy truth that her time was running out. And somewhere, just beyond her reach, the answer she needed was already beginning to move. That night, sleep would not come. Evelyn lay on her narrow bed, staring at the low ceiling as the trailer creaked softly with the wind. Every sound felt louder in the dark. The ticking clock, the distant hum of a passing truck, her own uneven breathing. 30 days. The number pulsed in her mind like a warning light. Before dawn, she made a decision. She dressed quietly and stepped outside while the sky was still gray, the town half asleep. Without fully meaning to, her feet carried her back toward the one place she hadn't planned to return to so soon, St. Bridget's. The church doors were unlocked. Inside, the sanctuary was empty. No choir, no congregation. Just rows of wooden pews and the altar bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. Evelyn walked slowly down the center aisle. This was the same path she had been forced to retreat from days earlier. Now, each step echoed in the silence. She sat in the last pew, hands clasped so tightly her fingers ached. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then the words spilled out. I've tried to be good, she whispered. I worked. I prayed. I didn't ask for much. Her voice trembled. I'm not asking for riches. I'm just asking to keep my home. Tears slid down her cheeks, unchecked now. It's all I have left of him, she said softly. Please, don't take that too. The silence did not answer. Footsteps sounded behind her. Evelyn stiffened. Father Matthew emerged from the side door, his black coat neat, his expression guarded. I didn't expect to see you here, he said coolly. Evelyn stood. This is my church, she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. He folded his hands. What happened last Sunday was unfortunate, but necessary. The church must maintain order. Reverence. Reverence? Evelyn repeated. Is that what you call it? He hesitated. People need to understand that approaching God requires dignity. Evelyn felt something rise in her chest. Hot, sharp, undeniable. And who decides what dignity looks like? She asked. Is it clean shoes? Perfume? Her voice shook now, but she didn't stop. Do you think I choose to live without hot water? Do you think I choose to smell like detergent and bleach because I enjoy it? Father Matthew took a step back. I've worked my whole life, Evelyn said. Harder than most. I've cared for the sick. I've given when I had nothing. And you stood there and told me I wasn't worthy. His face reddened. Watch your tone. Or what? She asked. You'll humiliate me again? She met his eyes without flinching. This is God's house, she said firmly. Not yours. And God doesn't turn away the poor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn turned and walked toward the door. Outside, the cold air hit her lungs, sharp and clean. She stood there trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Relief. She had spoken the truth. The debt was still there. The clock was still ticking. But for the first time since the altar, Evelyn Carter lifted her head and knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, she would not carry shame with her anymore. Evelyn didn't know where she was going when she left the church. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her through quiet streets as the sun slowly climbed over the hills. Morning light brushed the town in pale gold, softening edges, forgiving shadows. It was the hour when everything felt possible for just a moment, before reality returned. Without realizing it, she found herself climbing the familiar steps near the overlook, the same place where she had nearly collapsed days earlier, the same place where hope had flickered for the first time in weeks. Evelyn lowered herself onto the stone bench, breathing carefully, letting the cool air steady her racing thoughts. She replayed the confrontation with Father Matthew again and again, not with regret, but with a strange sense of calm. She had told the truth. Maybe that was all she was meant to do. "Beautiful morning." The voice came from her right. Evelyn turned sharply. He was there again. The man from the steps. Same worn jeans. Same plain white shirt. Same quiet presence that didn't demand attention, yet somehow commanded it. He sat beside her, looking out over the town as if he had all the time in the world. "I was hoping I'd see you again," Evelyn said before she could stop herself. He smiled gently. "I know." Her heart skipped. "How do you—" "You did the right thing back there," he said, interrupting her softly. "Speaking truth takes courage." Evelyn swallowed. "I don't feel brave. I feel tired and scared." "That's what courage usually feels like," he replied. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing on her chest. "Why does it feel like I've been doing everything alone?" The man turned to her then, really looked at her. His eyes held no pity, only understanding. "You were never alone," he said. "Not one day." A chill ran through her, though the air was warming. He stood and reached into his pocket, pulling out nothing this time. No money, no card, no explanation. "Tomorrow," he said, "go to the flea market on Route 9. Find a man named Mr. Alvarez. He has something for you." Evelyn frowned. "I don't know anyone there." "He knows you," the man replied simply. "Trust me." She opened her mouth to ask his name, to ask who he was, how he knew so much, but he was already stepping away. "Wait," she said, standing. "Who are you?" He paused but didn't turn around. "My name isn't important," he said. "What matters is this. When you thought no one saw you, you were seen. When you thought no one cared, you were carried." Then he walked down the path, his figure slowly blending into the movement of the waking town. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart pounding. She didn't understand what had just happened. She didn't know who he was. But for the first time in a long while, the fear inside her loosened its grip. As she sat back down, one thought settled into her soul with quiet certainty. Whatever waited for her tomorrow, she would not face it alone. The next morning, Evelyn woke before her alarm. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the encounter at the overlook had been nothing more than exhaustion mixed with hope. The kind of hope that played tricks on a tired mind. But the words were still there, clear and steady. Route 9, flea market, Mr. Alvarez. She dressed carefully, choosing the cleanest clothes she had, and stepped out into the cool air. The bus ride took longer than usual, winding past neighborhoods she rarely visited. When she finally got off, the flea market stretched out before her, rows of tents and folding tables, the smell of coffee and fried dough hanging in the air. Evelyn hesitated at the entrance. She didn't belong here, either. She had no money to spend, no reason to browse. Still, she walked in. She moved slowly from aisle to aisle, past old records, used tools, handmade candles. She asked twice about Mr. Alvarez and was pointed farther back each time, until the noise thinned and the stalls grew smaller. At the far end, she found him. A man in his early 60s stood behind a table of carved wooden crosses and small religious figures. He had gray hair, thick glasses, and hands worn smooth by years of work. "Mr. Alvarez?" Evelyn asked softly. "Urhio." He looked up and smiled as if he had been expecting her all along. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm glad you came." Her breath caught. You know my name?" He nodded and reached beneath the table, pulling out a plain manila envelope. He placed it gently in her hands. "A friend asked me to give you this." Evelyn frowned. "What friend?" "A man who doesn't say much," Mr. Alvarez replied. "But he sees a great deal." Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Bills spilled out onto the table. She stared, unable to breathe, as she counted them once, then again. 1,000, 2, 3, 4. When she finished, her hands dropped to her sides. 4,160. The exact amount. Not a dollar more, not a dollar less. This can't be right," Evelyn whispered. "I can't accept this." "Mr. Alvarez's voice was gentle but firm. He said you wouldn't want to. He also said you needed to." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. "Where is he?" she asked. "I need to thank him." Mr. Alvarez shook his head. "I don't know. He came 3 days ago, gave me the envelope, told me to wait." "To wait for me?" "Yes." Evelyn pressed the envelope to her chest, sobbing now, unashamed. The fear that had lived inside her for weeks cracked open and spilled out, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. Gratitude. "Oh, I don't understand," she said through tears. Mr. Alvarez smiled softly. "Neither did I. But some things don't ask to be understood. Only received." Evelyn left the flea market walking faster than she had in months. She went straight to the office. She paid the debt. She watched the clerk stamp the receipt and slide it across the counter. Balance. $0, 0 hour outside. Evelyn leaned against the wall, clutching the paper in her hand. Her home was safe. And deep in her heart, she knew something else had been settled too. Something far greater than money. She had been seen. The church was full again the following Sunday. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of St. Bridget's, scattering color across the pews. Families filled the aisles. The choir sang with confidence. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Evelyn slipped into a seat near the back. She wore the same sweater, the same worn shoes. Nothing about her appearance had changed. But inside, something had settled. The receipt with the stamped balance, $0. B. Rested folded in her purse like a quiet miracle. Father Matthew stepped up to the altar. He began the homily with practiced ease, speaking about discipline, about order, about living rightly before God. His voice was steady, controlled. Then, in the middle of a sentence, it stopped. Not a pause for effect, not a breath. Silence. The priest stared toward the back of the church, his face draining of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Father Matthew's hands began to shake. He took a step back from the pulpit, then another, as if something unseen were pressing toward him. His eyes fixed on a point no one else seemed to notice. Evelyn felt her heart pound. The church grew so quiet she could hear her own breathing. Suddenly, Father Matthew dropped to his knees. Gasps filled the sanctuary. Tears streamed down his face as his voice broke free, loud and unguarded. "I have been wrong," he cried. "I have judged where I was called to love. I have closed doors God never told me to close." He pressed his forehead to the floor. "I turned away one of his children," he said, his voice shaking. "I humiliated her, and I did it in his house." The priest lifted his head, eyes searching the pews until they found her. "Evelyn," he said. A collective intake of breath followed. "Forgive me," he pleaded. "Forgive me for seeing clothing instead of a heart. Forgive me for my pride." Evelyn's hands trembled in her lap. After Mass, Father Matthew asked to speak with her privately. In his office, the man who had once stood so rigid now looked small, broken. "This morning," he said, wiping his eyes, "I saw someone at the back of the church, a man I have never seen before." He swallowed. He didn't say a word. He only looked at me, and in that look, I saw myself as I truly am. Evelyn's chest tightened. "He saw everything," Father Matthew continued. "Every judgment, Every moment I chose comfort over compassion, and then I heard a voice, not aloud, but clear as day. His voice dropped to a whisper. It said, "By what right do you reject those I love?" He covered his face. Your name was spoken. I knew I had to change. Evelyn stood silently, the image of the man from the Overlook rising unmistakably in her mind. When Father Matthew finally looked up, his eyes were red and searching. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said, but I am asking for it. Evelyn took a long breath. She thought of the steps, the $20 bill, the envelope with the exact amount. She thought of the eyes that had seen her when no one else did. I forgive you, she said quietly. Father Matthew wept openly. That day, the altar that had once been a place of humiliation became something else entirely. It became a place where truth had spoken louder than pride, and the silence that fell upon it was no longer cruel. It was holy. Evelyn walked out of the church that day with her head held higher than she had in years. Nothing about the world outside had changed. The streets were the same. The town moved at the same pace. People hurried past with their own worries and plans. But Evelyn was different. In the weeks that followed, Father Matthew kept his word. The church doors stayed open, not just for Sunday Mass, but every evening. A small pantry appeared near the fellowship hall, then a soup night. At first, only a few people came, then more, then many more. Father Matthew served the meals himself. Evelyn helped quietly. She wiped tables, washed dishes, learned names. She didn't need to be asked. Service was something her hands already knew. One afternoon, as she was stacking chairs, a young woman hovered near the doorway. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back hastily. A little boy sat on her hip, his head resting against her shoulder. I'm sorry, the woman said hesitantly. I was told there might be food or work. Evelyn saw herself instantly in the woman's eyes, in the way she tried not to look desperate. What's your name? Evelyn asked gently. Jasmine, she replied. This is Noah. Evelyn smiled. Can you wash dishes? Jasmine laughed weakly. I can do anything. Good, Evelyn said. Come with me. That night, Jasmine and Noah ate. The next day, Evelyn showed her where to find cleaning work. A week later, Jasmine helped Evelyn with laundry jobs. They watched Noah together, shared groceries, shared burdens. The help didn't stop with them. It moved outward, quietly, steadily, like ripples in water. Evelyn never spoke of the man from the steps. She didn't need to. But sometimes, when she walked past the Overlook at dawn, she felt that familiar warmth in her chest. And once, just once, she thought she saw a figure leaning against the railing. Plain clothes, calm eyes. When she blinked, he was gone. She smiled anyway. Because she understood now. He hadn't come to stay. He had come to show her how to see. Years later, people in town would speak of Evelyn Carter with affection. They would say she had a gift for listening, for helping, for noticing those everyone else missed. Evelyn never corrected them. She knew the truth. She had simply passed along what had first been given to her. Love without conditions, dignity without approval, faith without appearances. One evening, back in her trailer, Evelyn lit a small lamp and sat at the table with a cup of tea. The receipt marked $0. Zero was still tucked inside her Bible, not as proof of money saved, but as a reminder of something far greater. She looked up and whispered softly, Thank you for seeing me. The room was quiet, but it was no longer empty, because wherever compassion lived, wherever forgiveness took root, wherever kindness moved from one heart to another, he was there. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe that faith is lived in love and not appearances, subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us, because the stories that matter most are the ones that remind us we are never alone.